Hey everyone, it's Pink Apple again, and wow is this an exciting time for Tales of Tribute. Today, I'll be touching on every card in the new Druid King deck, as well as going over my favorite combos and strategies so far. But before we jump into the cards, we actually have a completely brand new mechanic being introduced alongside the deck, and that's the Wow and Play tag, which you can see on this card here. Now this functions about as you would expect. Simply put, after playing this card, for the rest of my turn, any card that enters my cooldown pile will trigger this effect, in this case granting me 1 power. Something important to note here is that there's no limit on how many times we can trigger these Wow and Play effects in any given turn. If you can manage to activate the effect 10 times, you get the benefits 10 times. Now where this effect becomes really interesting, however, is when we start looking at agents. Let's take a look at the Stone Lore Rock Seer, for example, which reads, Wow and Play, whenever an agent, including this one, is activated or played, gain 1 coin. So that seems like a pretty simple effect, right? If we have a bunch of agents in our deck, we can play them alongside our Stone Lore Rock Seer and generate a bunch of extra gold. But the really unique part about this effect is it actually specifies whenever an agent is activated or played, not whenever you play or activate an agent. This means you can reap the benefits of your Wow and Play effects even during your opponent's turn. So let's take a quick look at how that actually plays out in the match. So as you can see, I have a Stone Lore Rock Seer out in play, and I'm going to pass my turn. And as my opponent plays all of their agent cards, my gold count is actively increasing, even though it's their turn. And this gold is simply going to carry into our next turn, allowing us to start with a few extra coins and potentially make some big purchases. This new mechanic adds a lot of depth to the game, and allows for a little bit more interaction during your opponent's turns than what we currently have right now. Now besides the Wow and Play effect, the Druid King is also pretty unique in the way its patron power functions. So the core ability here costs 2 power, and lets you remove up to 2 cards from the tavern. This is a pretty strong effect in the right situations. It can be used offensively to try and cycle through the tavern and give yourself some better buying options, or more defensively to prevent your opponent from buying a really strong card next turn. But what's new here is that we also have this passive effect that's making it so if we combo enough Druid King cards in one turn, we get a Chimera card added to our cooldown pile. This is somewhat similar to how the Orignum patron power adds a more boarding party to your deck. Except since this is a passive, you don't actually have to use the Druid King patron power to get this effect. As long as you manage to combo enough Druid King cards in any given turn, you'll get the Chimera for free. With that out of the way, let's jump straight into the cards and I'll give my first impressions of how each one plays. So I actually have no idea how to pronounce this first card, so I'll just be calling it Runes to keep things simple. We're starting out with 2 gold, which automatically makes the card viable as an early game pickup. And then we also get Wow and Play, gain 1 power whenever an agent is placed in your cooldown pile. We'll see this effect on some other cards in the deck as well, and it's a pretty difficult one to activate, especially in the early game. The most common method is simply buying any agent from the tavern, as all bought cards go straight into your cooldown pile, and that will give you the extra power. However, if we think back to our patron power, it has that passive that can add chimeras to our deck, and that also counts as another way to get agents into our cooldown pile. Overall, Runes is a pretty average card, and while its secondary effect likely won't get activated early on, if you plan on going heavy into the Druid King deck, it serves as a consistent way to build up combos. Similar to how Reinforcements functions in the St. Helen deck, or Sleight of Hand in the Rajin deck. Moving on to its upgrade, we have Vestments of the Druid King. This has the same 2 gold base effect, but the WoW in play triggers off of any card entering your cooldown pile this time, rather than just agents. This is obviously much easier to pull off, and ends up getting triggered nearly every time it's played. I find this card to be an absolute pickup for the Druid King deck. And honestly, I'd make the argument it's strong enough to be picked up for any other decks in the early game as well. There's even certain late game situations where I've had this card end up giving me anywhere from 5 to 15 power in one turn, while only costing 2 gold. Vestments of the Druid King is definitely an S tier card in my book, and it's possibly a bit overpowered. Next up, we have another early game gold generation card in Wispcaller Totem. So we always get at least 1 gold when we play Wispcaller Totem. And if we can combo it with just one other Druid King card, it turns into a luxury exports. But on top of that, in the late game, once we start pulling off big combos, Wispcaller Totem is giving us an insane 6 gold on play. Now where the card starts to get really crazy is when we start comboing it with multiple copies of itself. And then numbers like 15 or even 20 gold aren't that unrealistic. So once again, we're looking at a reasonably strong early game card that also scales great into the late game. If you manage to pick one of these up alongside one of the other 2 cards we already covered, you're looking at a really strong opener. But hold on, because things start to get even better. The card upgrades into Wispheart Totem, which is the same card but gets an additional 2 more gold on combo 3, racking up the total gold potential to 8 gold on play. At this point, the card's gold making potential is so high that even if you aren't playing a Druid King deck yourself, I think you might have to start picking this up to prevent your opponent from comboing it. If you plan on committing to a Druid King deck in your match, then the totems are some of the best cards to see in your opening boards. Now finally settling down a bit, Deepwood's Ritual is one of the cards I try to avoid picking up in my early games. So we only get 2 power on play here, and we really need to land the combo 3 before the card starts seeing reasonable value. Ideally, you're picking this card up after having a handful of other Druid King cards in your deck already, and you could consistently be getting that extra 3 prestige. At that point, the card's giving us as much prestige as if we played the Armory, and we'll likely be starting to activate that Patron Power passive to add Chimeras to our deck as well. Overall, the card's decent enough in the mid to late game, but definitely avoid picking this up in your first few turns. The card does get slightly better if you have the Hunting Patron in your game, as it lets you spend that 2 power to flip that in your favor whenever you need to. And it also gives us enough power to activate our Druid King Patron power. So that's usually not something we want to be doing in the early stages of the game. Next up, we have Forest Wraith, which is a 4-cost contract agent that immediately gives 1 power on play, and then while in play, grants us an additional 2 power every time a card enters our cooldown pile. This is an absolute powerhouse of a card, and I think there's a really good chance Forest Wraith gets nerfed before hitting live servers. So let's quickly go over just some of the ways this card is going to give you 2 power. Whenever you buy or acquire a card from the Tavern. Whenever you use the treasury to make a writ. Whenever your opponent gives you a Bewilderment card. Whenever your opponent kills one of your agents. Whenever you add a Chimera to your deck with the Druid King Patron power. Whenever you add a Mormor Boarding Party to your deck with the Orgnum Patron power. Whenever you toss cards from your draw pile into the cooldown pile. And there's even a few other ways I didn't mention. The point is, if you're really trying to, you can reasonably get 10 plus cards into your cooldown pile in a single turn, which would make this card generate 21 power, and then it stays on the board. On top of that, since it's a contract agent, you can use it to easily trigger your other Druid King combos that are in your hand. Overall, Forest Wraith is an absurd contract agent, and while it's maybe not the best turn 1 pickup, in the right situations, it's incredibly lethal. Next Next up, coming in at 5 gold cost, we have the Stonelore Rockseer, which I showcased briefly at the start of the video. The card baseline gives us 1 power, and then while in play, whenever an agent, including this one, is activated or played, gain 1 coin. So bare minimum, we're always getting 1 coin and 1 power. This agent is pretty tame compared to the highlights of the deck, and is rather mediocre on its own. Do keep in mind, just like with the other agents, this effect does trigger during your opponent's turn. But your opponent does have the chance to kill Stonelore Rockseer before playing their agents, or if they can't find a way to kill the Rockseer, they can just skip out on activating their agents. Overall, I'd say if you're dipping heavily into the Druid King deck, pick this card up. But otherwise, it's really not a standout card unless both players have a ton of agents. There is some synergy to be had with hiding the Rockseer behind some taunt agents, but in the end, it's just a lot of work for less payoff than some of the other cards in the deck. Its upgrade, the Envoy, adds 1 extra point of health to the card, which is particularly nice because I find 3 health survives a lot more threats than 2, such as the Oigdom Patron Power, the Portcullis card, Pool of Shadow, and the list continues on. So the upgrade has a decent bit of extra staying power, but overall, the card is still pretty heavily outclassed by one of the agents that we'll be going over soon. Next up, we actually have another 5 cost agent in the Firesong Haruspex. Personally, I find this agent to be one of the more underwhelming cards of the deck, and unless I'm fully committed to massive Druid King combos, I don't like picking this agent up. We can only ever get 1 coin on play, and in most cases, generating Prestige is actually worse than raw power, since you can't kill enemy agents with Prestige, and you also can't activate patron powers. Once again, this agent's WoW and play effect can trigger during your opponent's turn, so technically, if you had 2 of these out behind a taunt agent, your opponent could end up generating you a couple Prestige on their turn, but I don't see that being too impactful in most cases. Our next 2 cards are some of the craziest cards Tribute has seen so far. Let's start off with the Eldertide Fenwitch, a 6 cost agent that gives 1 gold on play, and additionally, while in play, if we add any card, including this one, to our cooldown pile, gain 1 gold. Then we have a Combo 2 effect, which adds 1 Wispcaller Totem to your deck, which if you remember correctly, is the card that can generate up to 6 gold if we combo big. And by adding this totem to your deck, you actually trigger the agent's while in play effect and gain the extra gold. So there's a lot going on here, right? Well, the card gets even crazier once we upgrade it to the right color, which doubles the while in play effect, giving us 2 gold anytime a card is placed in our cooldown pile. Now remember all of those ways we talked about generating power with the Forest Wraith? Well, those all apply to the right color, giving 2 gold from each activation. In my opinion, given a little bit of setup, this is by far the most broken card in Tales of Tribute. And honestly, I'd say this card needs to be adjusted in some way before this deck goes live. If you have a right color in play, alongside a Fenwitch, you can actually gain more gold than you spend when buying cheap cards from the tavern. This card can just absolutely break the game. To showcase just how insane this card can be, I'm going to pull up an example of what playing 2 Time Masteries alongside this agent looks like. Yeah, casually turning 2 Time Masteries into 20 gold is pretty insane, right? Now imagine throwing in some Dreaming Caves, a couple Wispcaller Totems, or even some Crow combos. Please don't let this card go live like this, ZeniMax. For our final card in the deck, we have Whispers of the Grove, the Druid King's only contract action. So for 3 gold, we get to remove 1 card from the tavern, which is not very good. But it lets us trigger our Druid King combos, and actually, if you land the combo 3, the card pays for itself. There's honestly not a whole lot more to add here. If you can combo with this card, definitely pick it up. And if your opponent is getting close to generating those chimeras, maybe pick this card up to deny them that combo. Speaking of the chimera, I think it's time we covered it fully. So again, this card will never actually show up in the tavern. You can only get chimeras from landing big Druid King combos and activating the Patron Power passive. The chimera is a 5 health taunt agent with no bonus effects on play, but quickly starts to ramp up when you combo it. And since we can only get the card from pulling off big combos in the first place, it should be relatively easy to combo off the agent itself. In my experience, most matches won't see you generating many chimeras, but if you do start getting multiples of these out there, there's not really that many possible decks that can keep up with the prestige generation you'll be getting, while also dealing with the high health taunts. If you're in a long grindy match that had a slow early game, a few chimeras can really close out the game. And that's all of the Druid King cards. So putting everything together, how exactly do you win games with the Druid King? And what decks combo nicely with it? The Druid King is a pretty heavy combo deck, so similar to the Duke of Crows, it benefits greatly from both the deck thinning that Red Eagle provides, as well as the toss effect from Psijic Order. In the deck's current state, toss cards like Time Mastery synergize so well with it that I personally recommend always drafting the Psijic deck alongside the Druid King. Most Druid King games, your goal is going to be to pick up some of the solid early game economy cards, and then wait to do some really crazy combos with the agents later into the game. And if the match ends up stalling out long enough, your chimera generation should really come into play. I'd like to remind everyone that all of the screenshots, gameplay footage, and card descriptions in this video are taken from the first few weeks of the PTS. So we could certainly see a large amount of balance changes before this deck hits live servers, and everything is subject to change. Once Update 36 does go live, you can look forward to an updated Druid King tier list from me, where I'll be giving individual rankings to each card based on where I view their power levels at the time of release. If you found this video useful in any way, please be sure to give the video a like, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, to those of you who actually made it this far into the video, leave me a comment down below, letting me know how you feel about this sort of longer form content. Do you guys want even more analysis, or do you prefer the quick 5 to 10 minute tier list videos? Until next time, and may the Divines bless your taverns with turn 1 vestments of the Druid King.